Hi, welcome everyone. Today we will be speaking to PD Singh. PD Singh is head of AI in UiPath. And before UiPath, PD Singh used to work in Microsoft, I think almost for 10 years or so. And that's where we met. And before Microsoft, I think you had your own startup.
Yep.
So let's start with UiPath. So PD Singh, tell us a little bit, what does UiPath do? What is their product?
Yep. No, thanks for having me. This is a great opportunity. So UiPath is a very interesting company. If you look at the processes that go on in a typical enterprise, if it is a digital process, it probably can be automated in part or completely. And UiPath has the product that will let you automate that process. And this whole space, it's an emerging space called robotic process automation. And it combines elements of automation, UI automation, backend automation, API automation, as well as invoking AI models. And so we are the market leader in the RPA space. We pretty much shaped up the whole space. So if you look at analyst ratings with the Gartner, Forrester, we are at the top. We were just announced as one of the top 3 cloud companies in the world, along with Snowflake. We were in AI 50, so we are in the top 50 AI companies. Any award and list out there, UiPath is probably in the top 10.
Very good.
Yeah.
So AI and UI. So what is this mix?
It's a very interesting question. So at the end of the day, we are sitting on top of your business applications. These business applications can be your line of business apps that have been custom built, or apps that people typically use in an enterprise, things like SAP or Salesforce. And so users are interacting with UX most of the time. When we talk about automation, you can build a layer, a shim layer on top of any application by interacting with the UI elements, and that's where the concept of UI automation comes along. But as you can imagine, there are a number of modalities in which a UI is built or rendered, right? You have the most modern apps like the Electron apps. You have something in the middle where you have .NET based apps. If you go a little farther into the past, you have VB apps, Windows apps. If you go really farther along, you have apps which are rendered on mainframes and green screens, like you had in AS400. So there's a whole spectrum of these apps, right? And so you need technology that can work across all the different modalities, and that's where AI comes in. So we have, we use computer vision pretty heavily, and essentially what we use computer vision for is understanding the elements on the screen. So no matter what kind of app is being rendered that you want to automate, our computer vision system will be able to understand the elements in there. We call them selectors. They are things like buttons, cells, input boxes, check boxes, any UI elements.
So you get them using the AI image processing.
Yes.
You don't get hold of the element like in HTML page when I'm testing, I have the element ID and all, and I catch that.
Yep.
And do everything. So it's
so we can do that also. Okay. But you can imagine if you're working, let's say, over RDP, you don't get those HTML elements, right? And so that's where your traditional RPA and we start diverging, because in your traditional RPA you would look at just what are called selectors. So for example, in Windows applications you have unique GUIDs assigned to every selector in a window. So if it's a button, if you remember Windows programming, if you've read the Charles Petzold book,
yep.
It used to detail all these different things in there, and so every UI element is a selector. But if you look at the modern applications, as I was saying, Electron apps or apps rendered over Citrix or RDP, you don't get those selectors at all. So you have to employ some technology that can understand all the different pieces on a screen, so that that this is a clickable link and you can go in and click on it. Now that clickable link can be coming from JavaScript. It can be an XML based thing which is rendered through CSS. There are multitude of things in there.
And in this, you don't need the access to the code itself, right? You just need a screen, and that screen can be made in COBOL, or
exactly.
The .NET,
doesn't matter,
or Windows 32. anything, and you can just process the screen.
Yep.
Wow, okay, interesting. So you are using AI very heavily in UiPath, and but if you see today, it's like almost reminds me of .com era, where all the companies, they used to put .com in front of them, and then they call themselves a .com company. And now I'm seeing something similar, not too much of that though, but still very similar. People have regression
Base model, yes.
based model, and then they will call themselves AI company.
Yep.
So and it looks like a veneer on top. So and I see very few companies who have implemented AI successfully, and UiPath is one of them.
Yep.
So can you talk about what problems you see implementing AI in production?
Yep. So one of the things we talk about, almost in every forum is that there's an AI implementation gap, right? If you look at enterprises who want to deploy AI in production in an enterprise grade setting, there's less than like 10% of them who have actually done that. But if you see the appetite of it, almost every CIO, CEO, and other C-level folks will tell you 90% of them are interested in putting something in AI, because everyone has a notional idea about what AI and some intelligence can do in their enterprise, in their specific vertical or use cases. We have taken a very different approach to AI. We, my background has been, in Microsoft research, in Microsoft also, we have taken a very pragmatic approach to AI, right? Take these models, be it anything from, your logistic regression to Bayesian models to deep learning, and apply it to real world problems and see, if you can solve those specific problems. In Microsoft, we built a system to automate most of your sales and marketing processes. And so it carries over, the work carries over. And in UiPath also, we are truly focused on pragmatic use cases of AI. So we don't go into these, loosey-goosey use cases where it's not clear where AI can add value. And so I can tell you, we are working across different horizontal functions, across different verticals, but the use cases are very specifically focused on adding that value to your enterprise use cases. The question that you asked is really interesting. Why is it so difficult? And the problem comes if you look at the deployment lifecycle of AI, right? The way it is developed, you would have a data science team which would churn out a model. It would be, typically a Python model. The DevOps process for traditional software in an enterprise is pretty well understood, right?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. What DevOps processes change because of AI?
So you can imagine, right? Even right from the point where you check in the code and start doing unit testing on top of your models, things start diverging, right? You can't just unit test an AI model. You pretty much need to have the checkpointed data and the model and the expected output to even unit test it, right? So it's not the old way where you just give a bunch of inputs to your software and they would remain the same. So right from unit testing over to actual deployment, right? When the thing is deployed, let's say one of your data feed goes off and it's a part of the features that your model is expecting, you would see your model accuracy drop, right? And so now you have to have that monitoring in place which can detect those drops, right? Usually if you have monitoring systems like PagerDuty, it will tell you, your whole API has stopped working, right? But there aren't systems out there that can detect things like, this is typically called, your concept drift, and they can't detect drift as easily in AI models. So that whole life cycle of how do you deploy a model, how do you checkpoint it, how do you version it, how do you do error detection and continuous monitoring, or even things like auditing, right? It is really difficult, and it's different from the way you would do DevOps in traditional software.
Right.
And that's what's creating the problem for a lot of these companies. Most of them, their normal DevOps processes don't apply to AI. And so, yes, you would hire a data science team and they would give you a model, but they don't know how to put that model into production because, this model is not as tangible and as well governed as your other applications
Right.
in the enterprise.
Right, because I see nowadays a lot of companies are coming up with this solution of AI in DevOps in a box. They are saying that, just bring your model and we take care of everything.
It's an emerging area called MLOps.
MLOps,
Yep.
right? So, what you think? What are your take on MLOps? Is it a good solution for somebody who is starting on ML path, some company, or it is better to have the whole DevOps in-house and you know exactly what's happening with your data and how models are moving along?
So it depends on, so if you look at large companies like Microsoft and Google, we pretty much had nailed this whole process, right? So you can have in-house people who know how to put models into production. If you look at a company which is just starting on their AI journey, they won't even know what are the elements that you need, right? And that's why in UiPath we have a product called AI Fabric, and AI Fabric is pretty much an MLOps system. The other problem that you have in AI is what we call the last mile problem, right? Let's say you built a model which gives you certain insights. So let's say you built a patient readmission prediction model, and it looks at your EMR data, looks at your past data from your data warehouse, and makes a determination if a patient should be discharged from the hospital or not. Let's say it flags a patient which should not be discharged from the hospital. What do you do with that data, right? Where do you show that data up? Does it go as a text message to the doctor? Does it show up in your nursing system? Does it show up in your EMR system? It's not easy to integrate the insights that are coming from your AI models into your front-end apps. And that's where RPA is supremely useful. That's why UiPath is where it is, and that's why I decided to join UiPath, because most of the time that my AI teams were spending in was this bridging the last mile gap. After the model is built, so modeling is usually 20% of the whole life cycle. 40 to 50% of it is usually featureization and data harmonization. And then when you go downstream, you have this problem where you don't know how to actually put this thing into production and how to interface with the LOB apps. And then the biggest problem that nobody talks about is completing the feedback loop, right? How do you track those insights were really useful? For example, this patient readmission system flagged a patient should not be discharged. And the doctor looked at the stuff and said, actually all these things, they're fine. This is just a fluke in the system. He should be able to send a feedback signal to the model saying, no, this was, a false negative, or, whatever you have made as an exception. And that exception should be taken back and the system should be retrained. It's really hard to complete that feedback loop because you can't even put the insight in the front end application. Forget about taking that data back and be able to retrain the model, right? And if you can't complete that feedback loop, it's not AI. It's just just plain old machine learning.
Machine learning.
Yep. And so we bridge that AI gap with the AI Fabric. We've taken care of all the MLOps thing. And so at the end of the day, we want to look at automation as an end-to-end process. Right from when the data comes in or when the user is interacting with the applications to invoking the ML model somewhere in the middle, giving out the insights and then collecting the data back on success and failures and retaining the whole pipeline automatically.
Okay, interesting, very good. I know, PD, you are running a pretty large team, you are heading the product also, and you are head of AI. So what are your responsibilities? Like, walk me through your day in office, what all things you do, and what is your focus area?
It's a very interesting question. So we in UiPath, I pretty much started the AI team, the AI product team, and essentially our job was to go in and clearly define what areas are we going to execute in, right? So if you look at right now all the different places where we've injected AI, computer vision straight into our drivers to be able to do this UI automation well. Then we have a product line called Document Understanding. It's basically a system that can, it's a workbench where you can run a lot of document-specific models. So think of something which is way more intelligent than your traditional OCR system, can understand things in POs, receipts, invoices, and stuff. So that's one product line. AI Fabric is another product line. It's essentially a platform, and Document Understanding runs on top of that. But we needed to define these areas of execution. As you can imagine, there are 10,000 things that you can do in AI, right? So the first order of business was lay down those areas and define what would be the execution paths of these things. We've done, in some of the areas we've done inorganic growth, like we've acquired a couple of companies. And so we said, because we saw the gap in building something organically was too huge. So my job at the end of the day is to define those product lines and see we start executing there. But once you have a V1 product in the market, so I can tell you, that is what I really, really like. In Microsoft, in my previous companies, if there's one thing I can tell you is consistent is I'm pretty good at building V1 products. Mm-hmm. But V1 products, again, are V1 because of a reason. It is an MVP. It is, no doubt, it should be useful to the users. But then, as you can imagine, if it is a successful product and if you've nailed the product market fit, you have to scale that product. And so part of the job is then to start looking at what are the scaling vectors that you're going to be using. So for example, in 2 of my product lines right now, the business is pretty stable. The pipeline looks pretty healthy. And now our job is to make sure, what are the different vectors that we're going to explore. For example, do the right partnerships with the right partners. For example, in AI Fabric, we have out-of-the-box models. But there's no reason why other companies cannot bring in their models, and we will let them monetize their models through our customers. So doing, now we are building a partnership strategy around that. So at the end of the day, my job is to make sure overall the business succeeds. Everything is a means to that end, right? Running the engineering properly, running the roadmap in a staged way where it is executable easily by the engineering. Keeping all the teams in sync where they know exactly where they are marching towards, making sure there's no misalignment between the business, the leadership, engineering, and product. So it's pretty much that whole gamut of things.
Okay, very interesting. So you manage a pretty large team and you are involved in product vision also, and defining the product and engineering too, everything together, right? So I want to know how you manage this large team, and obviously there are different kind of people out there, because engineering team will have all engineers, devs, DevOps people, and then you have product where people most probably come from MBA background. Yep. So there are different kind of people out there in your team. So I would like to know, what is your management philosophy?
So it depends on exactly as you said. The way you manage things depends on the people that you're talking to, right? There's always this impedance mismatch between the teams. If product is talking to engineering, there will be some impedance mismatch, or vice versa. Or product talking to, let's say, a release, or release talking to engineering, or engineering talking to support, because there's a lot of pieces, right? And so everywhere there is some impedance mismatch. Like, for example, my PMs are, super focused on business, and so they would talk about business all day long. But it has to be translatable and easily understandable by engineering on where are we going, right? With all this business talk, with the roadmap that we are building, we should be in complete sync. So you have to be able to translate those things. So those translation layers should work, because if they are not working, things will break down, right? The engineering won't understand what is needed from the product. They'll, try to run in their own direction without knowing what is needed by the market, by the users to grow the business, and there will be a misalignment there, and you would not, get the real product. The good product that is applicable for your users. So clearing out those misalignments is the first thing. But then there are overall things that you have to do as a manager. For example, one of my management philosophy is what is called as a radical candor, right? It's radical transparency, where you have to be completely transparent between all the parties, up or down the chain, right? So for example, all my PMs, right down to the M2 level PMs know exactly where are we in terms of the business, in terms of product, and so there's no information hidden in the team at all. And I've seen that does wonders, because people feel that they are vested, and they are vested as owners of the product and of the business, and they take pride in delivering stuff.
Very good. Yeah. You are a managing engineering team also, right? So I want
used to.
Used to. So and I know that you were once upon a time in startup, and you spent a long time in Microsoft in MSR. Specifically here, where you are head of the whole division as such. So what are the best practices of engineering you are using? What are the methodologies you are using? Is it Scrum, Kanban? Can you talk a little bit about your engineering?
Yeah, so we,
practices?
from the product standpoint, we definitely use Kanban boards. So we use a product called Product Board to just, do a high-level sync between the product and engineering on what we are doing. So there's, as you know, from your Microsoft days, you go about planning in certain cycles. So we have both an on-prem product and a cloud product. Our on-prem product runs with a cadence of about 6 months. So every 6 months we release the product. So you can imagine everything flows from there. So for the first month, we would be doing the planning and prototyping and things in the middle. Then for the next 2-3 months, we are doing the coding. 1 month before the release, the code complete deadline happens. And then at some point after that, you hit the ZVP. And we release the candidates. So we have a preview program. We test it out with a set of customers, and so it's your classic model. But in our cloud products,
How you plan your products? Do you write a BRD, business requirement documents, and then the functional spec, tech spec?
Yep.
Does all this documentation happen, or?
So the way we do it specifically in my team is we have we start with what is called a one pager. So if, for example, we need to start, let's say, go into a new area. Let's say with AI Fabric, we wanted to go in and do on-prem version of AI Fabric. What does that even mean, right? So write down a simple one pager, send it to the management chain up and down to get everyone on the same page. Then we go the Amazon style route where we expand the one pager into a 6-pager, which puts in more detail on what exactly needs to happen there. The 6-pager is distributed to the individual PMs who are responsible from then taking the parts in that 6-pager and defining the exact features. The features go into your Kanban board. Then the features, from the Kanban, we link it to Jira.
So this feature, when the PM is writing, this is the functional spec.
This not the functional spec. This is just a very high level
spec. It's not a waterfall functional spec of 200 pages, but few pages.
It's just few paragraphs.
Few paragraphs. So do you write tech spec after that?
Yes. So
okay.
So the real spec is written in Jira. So we go in, write the real spec in Jira, because in Jira what happens is then devs can start interacting with that stuff. So as soon as they have questions coming in, we can start answering those questions in Confluence.
Okay. So you write it in Confluence, the tech specs, right?
Yep.
In Jira you will have maybe your sprint plan and Kanban board.
Yep.
Okay. So you do the documentation of at least spec is there in some form, then tech spec, and then the code only.
So you can imagine, we have geo-distributed teams. So we have teams in Bucharest, India, here in Bellevue, and they work in all different time zones.
Do you have any test team? Or
we do have a QA team, yeah.
Do you have
because
a QA
you can
team?
imagine, for the on-prem product, you definitely need a QA team.
Oh, so you didn't get on that fashion bandwagon of no test?
In cloud, we do that.
Okay.
So in cloud, we do that, but we needed a QA team because, as you can imagine, our product, the problem with on-prem products is you don't get any telemetry back, right? So in cloud, if something is not working, you can see that the feature is not working. You can go fix it in a completely, agile way, and that works out pretty well. If you have a product that goes on-prem and they are deploying it in an air-gapped environment where you don't get any telemetry back, your product is supposed to work really, really well there.
Okay.
So we make sure.
So you still maintain the QA team for the on-prem product.
Yep.
So you have not embraced that no more test and it's all dev. But I agree with you. For on-prem, you do have a QA team.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Definitely. We've seen, that's how we maintain really high quality of our products. You definitely need the QA team. It doesn't have to be a large QA team. Like if you remember in Microsoft, it was lopsided. The
right.
QA team was almost as large, if not larger, than the dev team.
Yes.
That's not the case in UiPath.
Right. And then we used to have a release team
Yes.
and all that. I remember release meetings used to be there.
Yep.
And, oh
So
my
we
God.
do have a release team, but it's mostly PMs, and we have release managers, because at the end of the day, somebody needs to do the checkpointing of the things, right? So for example, if you're hitting code complete right now, you want to make sure that the build is built. You hit the ZBB, the QA team gives a go ahead. Product marketing says yes, this is we are ready with the messaging. Documentation team has to be ready, support has to be ready to take the product so that when it's deployed to the customer, they can start supporting the things. So somebody has to run the trains on time,
Right.
and so that's the job of the release team to do that.
Okay. But you don't have a release manager title as such. It's all done by your PMs.
We actually do.
You do. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
So we have release managers, but as I said, they are PMs.
Okay. They are PMs.
They are
okay.
PMs. Yep.
Okay.
But they don't report to specific functions. Like there is a team of release managers which sits across the product line. So we have a platform where we have close to about 9 to 10 different product lines.
Okay.
And so the release managers I think they're like 4 or 5 of them, which sit on top of all those 10 product lines.
You talked about writing that one pager, setting up the vision, and then it turns into 6 pages. And so I'm always very curious to find out how these successful companies like yours and Microsoft and Google and Amazon, how they make sure the vision flows from top to bottom. Because I've worked in many different companies, and I'm seeing this is a issue that the founder or the CEO, they have a vision, but that vision does not translate to everybody down at on the bottom rung as such, and then there's a mismatch.
Yep.
So how are you doing anything special, or what you do to make sure that everybody in your big team gets the vision, like
Yep.
where are we heading,
Yep.
and what we're going to do for that?
Yep. And so you can use, Amazon does that, and we do that in UiPath also. You can start things from ground up, right? So for example, right now I have X number of product lines. Every one of them would have a 6-pager on those product lines. Then I would combine all those 6-pagers into the 6-pager for the AI team, and we would say, these are the big rocks that we are going to get.
Right.
There's this analogy of getting big rocks into a container filled with sand, and it's like, okay, you take a couple of things off and put the big rocks in, and it's essentially that way, the way we work. Like for example, I'm going to have a meeting shortly on the next cycle, and what we are proposing there is that we would strengthen the core of the products that we've already built, but we'll also take 5 to 10% of the resources to do the more advanced stuff. And so that's a 6-pager for the AI team, but it's built on top of all the 6-pagers that are coming in from the individual teams with the product lines within the AI team. Now, AI team is just one part of the whole product portfolio. So my boss goes in and builds a 6-pager for all of the products across the company. And then the vision goes up, right? And so we've seen this bubbling up. It's the same thing that happens in Amazon also. So we've seen, if you take the ground up approach, it works pretty well, because the people on top can always, do a break check and say, these things, we don't think they may be that useful, right?
Right.
But you're totally right that if things are flowing from the top, there is a risk of that mistranslation happening as things flow down into the organizations.
Okay. Yeah, it's always, I wonder how and what they do, because it's not about just writing all these documents, but it is a component of culture also.
Yeah.
Right? So you are setting up that culture and making sure that everybody aligned to the vision.
Yep.
And otherwise, things doesn't happen. If people don't buy in,
Yep.
then no matter what you say.
You're absolutely right. So for example, in my case right now, as I was saying, most of my products are hitting scale right now. So 90% of the job that we have is in making sure that product works. 80 to 90% of the job is that way. So for example, there's a lot of tech debt that we have to pay, because in V1, typically the speed to market is super important. So we get a product out there, but it may have, we've cut some corners. and also we go in and pay off that tech debt. So you may not see as many features as we release in the V1, but the product becomes more robust, it becomes more scalable, and so that's what we would do for the next cycle. But we will reserve some 5 to 10% capacity to do something really interesting. But if you looked at our plans like from a year ago, everything was new, right? Almost 80 to 90% of the team was focused on the new features that are going to be built. But now, that speed is going to slow down. And once we bubble this up to the management, they can tell us, the big bets that we are trying to make, if they make sense or not, if they're going to fund them or not, right? So it's like mini Shark Tank happening in the company. And in Amazon also, it's a similar way. You pitch what your vision is to your manager, and essentially, that manager is going to decide if he or she is going to give you resources to execute or not.
Right. So this is really important to learn and know that it is bottoms up approach. It is not that you are the head of AI, so every wisdom is just flowing from you from top to bottom. It's a big team sport.
And if you look at all the really efficiently run companies, like Steve Jobs used to say this, if I've hired a smart person,
right,
I'm not going to tell you what to do. I've hired a smart person so that they can tell us what to do.
True.
And so I definitely believe in that philosophy. So most of the people that we have, they are like really, really smart people. They have the experience. They've been operating in their space for a while.
Right.
So there's a lot of organizational memory that is built there. I can only give them high-level directions on where we should be going, looking at the mega trends and stuff.
Right.
But other than that, I should not be giving too much input. If I am, that means something is wrong.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. So I'll change our questioning a little bit because our audience is a young dev leads and dev managers who are getting into management. That's my core audience. And you've been through all different discipline. You played different roles. You were dev, you were PM, and then now you are heading a large team. So I would like to know two things from you. One is when somebody becomes a new dev lead, what all thing he should change about himself, because he was a good dev and that's why he's promoted to dev lead. And I think that transition is the most difficult transition, I feel, and I found people to do that. Even myself, looking back, I had not much advice, so I stumbled upon for a long time in that role. So that's one. What things you should change and look for when you become from dev to dev lead, M1. And then second part of the question is what you change when you become M2.
Yep.
A dev manager who is having different managers reporting to them. So let's talk about first about M1.
Yep.
When you become dev lead, what are the things you should look for, change about yourself?
So it's a really good question. There are some common themes that you should always abide by. Like, for example, in the technology industry, people think that technology is the most important part. I would say that's not really true, right? As you rise up in the management, you realize people are everything, right?
True.
If you have a good team, it's going to execute things really well. And so if that is the underlying philosophy, everything flows from there. So it's like, if you look at, let's say, just football, you have a lot of players on the ground who are experts in the way they play, in the positions that they play in, but the coach is a different person, right? The job of the coach is to be the force multiplier. And it's the same thing with the development teams also. The dev leads are force multipliers. At the end of the day, their job is to look at things that are blocking their developers, right? That are hampering them from doing things faster. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. Even in the company, early on when we started expanding our dev teams, one of the problem that came up was our code reviews were taking too much time, right? The PRs were taking too much time, and so it was a job of the dev leads to go in and fix what was going on there.
Right.
And they did end up doing that, and the whole company started moving really, really fast after we fixed the problem. But it was a problem that could only have been fixed at the dev lead level and not at the individual developer level.
Right.
And so you become that, you have to be that force multiplier. And then so that's the M1 part of the stuff. As you go to the M2 part, an interesting change happens because you are kind of disconnected from the people on the ground. And you are answerable for, a whole product line and the business. And at that point, the most important thing becomes that whatever your management wants, you're translating it properly to the people below you, right? Because the management would say, for example, this product needs to beat a competitor in the next 2 years. What does that even mean?
Right.
Well, it means you going in and analyzing, what are the features that the competitors have? How do you exceed those features?
Right.
And so once you start looking into what are the different vectors that you have to exploit, that is the main job of what I would call, your M2 level manager, because you are assuming that your M1 guys are doing their job, they are the force multipliers, and now you're giving them, high level directions in terms of where the business, where the product needs to go. Like, for example, if you're expecting 100x growth in users, you should be looking at, scalability of your product. If you're looking at, your service being, giving an uptime of, let's say, 5 nines, 4 nines,
Right.
You need to make sure that, those metrics are being tracked properly and people are working towards those common shared goals.
Yeah, this is, I think, very important for people to know that how at every level you have to change, because what you got here is not necessarily
Going to get you to the other level.
to the next level.
Yep.
So you have to keep changing,
Yep.
keep forgetting stuff, and keep learning the new things.
Yep.
So I think, yeah, that's a good advice you gave about M2, that they suddenly they do get little abstracted away from technologies because they are now M2, and they should start focusing more towards the business problems as such.
But I'll be honest with you, I think that underlying understanding of the technology is super important.
Of course.
Because I've seen, some M2s fail because they don't really know the nitty-gritties of the technologies anymore,
True.
right? So they would hear, some technology trend from their peers or from the top, and they would say, "Yep, let's go with that technology."
Right.
Without knowing, what is the underlying thing. Like, for example, in Microsoft, it happened to me a couple of times, where we went in and we were looking at certain new schemes for doing the AI deployment. So containerization was, new at that time. But we ended up in my engineering team, I remember it was a peer engineering team, not my own, but a product that was already in motion. And they ended up building this system which was, really, it just couldn't scale. And so even though it was a beautiful system, they had taken care of, most of the features that could have been done there, but it wasn't the system that could support the scale that we needed for all our customers.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I firmly believe that no matter what your position is in the hierarchy, if you belong to engineering team, you have to be an engineer. And
Yep.
in fact, I'll go one step more, that you have to be coder even. I see Scott Guthrie. He's such a big VP of such a big team, large team.
Yep.
And still he's able to code in conferences and all, online in front of thousands of people.
Yep.
So do you code? Do you still play around with
I still
things?
code on my personal projects, yes.
So you code still, right? That's one thing I want to make sure people get this thing,
Yes.
that you code being the head of AI and still your hands are
Well,
dirty.
that's the only way to test things out, right? If,
Right.
for example, let's say a new thing comes up,
Right.
Unless and until I'm able to play with it, I can't know, how good this thing is.
True.
And the only way to test out these, for example, a new, let's say, I was testing out this AutoML library yesterday, It's called Teapot. You throw a bunch of data at it, and it automatically, tells you. It's an AutoML library. So it tells you all the different models and their, objective functions. Let's say if you're tracking AUC or F1 score, and it's a pretty interesting system. But I wanted to test, how much data can it take in, and what does the speed look like. The only way to do it is actually, code it yourself and see how it works.
True. No, I'm very much with you. In fact, this is my pet peeves when I'm interviewing, senior managers, and if they are not coding, I have big hesitation that, to hire them in a dev team to manage devs or dev leads, even to manage dev managers even. You have to have good understanding of technology. So that brings me to my next question is about hiring. So when you are hiring, what all things you look for in a candidate? Of course, as we were talking about it, he has to be technical and know how to code and all. Do you guys still do whiteboarding, like in Microsoft, do the algorithm on whiteboard? So what other things you look for in a candidate while interviewing?
So we use a bunch of screening tools. HackerRank is one of them. Just to get a basic sense of if the person can code or not. And then yes, of course, when we have the follow-up interviews, the in-person interviews, whiteboarding session is part of the technical interviews. I'll be honest with you. So I'm mostly involved in the loops for dev leads and above. I was involved in technical loops for developers a long time ago, but usually it's dev leads and above. And in those loops, one of the things, like I'm looking at a couple of things. One is definitely that intellectual curiosity, right? Because given the nature of the space that we are operating in, things change so quickly. Like what the thing that is relevant today becomes irrelevant tomorrow. So you need to have that intellectual curiosity where you are going in and hunting for these new things that are coming up that are more optimal than what you have, so that you can make the changes. So definitely intellectual curiosity is one. The other thing is, at least what I look for is the passion.
How do you judge that though?
Curiosity?
Yeah.
It is pretty easy. Like you can ask a bunch of questions, right? You can ask the person, what are they actually passionate about? And it can be anything. It should not be related to work.
Right.
Ask them what they are really passionate about. Let's say if they say they are passionate about photography. Okay, let's go down deep into photography and see what have you done there? What are the latest trends that you're seeing in photography, right? Like, are there new kind of drone technologies, these 4K drones that are better? Tell us more about that, right? So as you go down that rabbit hole, you would know how deep this person can go, right? And that tells you about the curiosity. So usually I would take them down that path where it's like either about things like motorcycles or hiking or whatever they are really passionate about, and seeing how far have they gone in that vein.
Yeah. No, sorry, I interrupted you. I completely agree with you about the curiosity and I firmly believe if you are not curious, you may have a very questionable future. I feel it's because everything is driven through your curiosity, and that's what takes you places because you are curious. So sorry, I interrupted you. You are talking about what all things you look in the candidate. So curiosity is one of the things. What other things?
The other quality that specifically I'm looking for is passion, right?
Passion.
Are you really passionate about your stuff? Because passion would drive your work ethic also, right? I don't have to care about you and give you explicit instructions and explicit milestones to hit if you're passionate about stuff. At the end of the day, if you're taking pride in the things that you're delivering and you're passionate about delivering them, you'll do it automatically. So passion is the other thing, and that one is hard to detect, even in interviews, right? Usually you're looking for, you're almost playing the role of a psychoanalyst at that time, because you're looking for these cues in body language and stuff as they start talking about their past projects or what are they really interested in doing. So passion is definitely the other one, I would say.
Okay. Passion and curiosity. It's important, I guess.
In addition to their technical,
Of course, that's I will
that's
say
a given.
that's a given thing.
Yes.
You have to, get through that min bar.
Yes.
That you should know your stuff,
Yep.
technology.
But usually, as you can imagine, companies like UiPath and Microsoft, they are hiring like top 2% of the developers.
Right.
Those are the qualities that let you stand out from the rest of the group.
From the rest of the loop. Yeah. That's what I think too. Because when you are going interviewing in these big companies, everybody is smart. Everybody is smart, right? And they know 2 + 2 is 4. So what else you do which will differentiate you from others?
Yep.
Yeah. So PD, I know you are pretty successful person. We talked about most of the companies you worked in and all that. I want to know about your failures. Can you tell me, which you can share with us and with the audience, some failure of your life and what did you learn from it?
I'll be honest with you, the only learnings, yes, I seem successful on the surface, but most of my successes have been shaped by the failures. And I'm thankful for those failures, right? So the things you can learn, either you can go to school and learn things, the old school way. But if you're operating in a highly dynamic, highly modern environment, like for example AI, well, it's not even clearly defined, how this field is going to shape up,
right.
What things are going to happen there. Like we talked about, even the basic things like DevOps is not even clear yet.
Yeah.
And so because the field is shaping up, you need to have this experiential learning. And Satya talks about this. When, if you remember, he came on as the CEO of Microsoft. One of the things he said was, we will be a learn-it-all company, not know-it-all company. And that is a really good advice, because if you are learning from your failures and experiences quickly, Facebook had this mantra, fail fast and move on.
Mm-hmm.
It is controversial the way they do it, but there is something to be said about quick learning from your experiences. Right. So I can tell you, for all the successes that I had, I think I have at least one failure attached to every success. Even in UiPath, for some of the product lines where we thought things would go a certain way, they have not. But it's a minuscule number, right? You at my level, you're essentially doing portfolio management. Right, and just like you have fund managers who make sure that if you have non-performing part of your portfolio, that doesn't affect the overall portfolio. It works out that way. But when I was early on in my career, you are naive, and you're just like a naive trader. You would make these really big trades where it's like if you lose, you're going to lose everything. Yeah. But if you succeed, it's going to be a home run. We don't do that anymore as you go on becoming more senior in your roles, because you can't bet the whole company on one specific thing. But there have been series of failures that I've learned things from. Like there was a company that I was trying to launch before UiPath, between Microsoft and UiPath. Mm-hmm. It was a really interesting technology, and it was a fascinating technical problem. Like the technologist in me and the developer in me was like fascinated. I was like, yeah, this is a cool place to work in. It was an AI company. But when I looked at the business part of it, it didn't look like you could build a unicorn in that area, even in like 10 years, right? The revenue was not going to be to the point where you can build that technology out quickly. And so it was a quick learning where it was like, we were trying to raise money for that company, and we quickly realized that the growth expectation that we had would not come from that business.
Right.
And so we decided, not to invest heavily in that specific area. Similarly, in the past, there are a couple of things that I've learned. Bill Gross, who started Idea Lab, he talks about this stuff. He has about 100 different startups that he has funded that became successful. Somebody was asking him, what is the one factor that is that you would say determines the success of a company, primarily, or in most majority of the cases. And it wasn't the founders, it wasn't the technology, it wasn't how the company was structured. It was the timing, right? The timing has to be right. I learned the things the hard way. Like there was a startup I was working on before Microsoft. So there was a company that I was working for that eventually became a part of Microsoft. But before that, the startup before that was a startup which was doing kind of mix of Pinterest and Facebook combined, and we are talking about 2005. The idea was way before its time, right? You didn't even have the monetization mechanisms in place to be able to build a business around it.
Right.
So the timing was wrong in that case. So there's a bunch of these series of these failures, and so now yes, I mentor a bunch of PMs, and I have PM directors who report to me, but those failures are the ones which I quote in most of my meetings. It's not the successes that were there.
Right.
But most of the times, my job, I see it as warning them about the potholes that can be there in front of them.
Right.
Because they know how to drive, they have the cars, and they have all I need to do is warn them of the potholes.
True.
If they can work around them, they're good drivers.
True. No, I want this to our audience to take away this thing. They hear you talking, and you work in this big company, UiPath, and being in Microsoft and all. But it's not all about successes. And don't shy away from your failure. And I feel everybody should take away this thing that it's a part.
Make the failures as your as a learning moment.
Right.
It should be taken as a learning moment. You shouldn't be down or get depressed if you're failing. It should just be taken as a big learning moment.
Right. Because my main audience is the kid sitting in Mongolia and starting his journey, career, and interviewing and maybe failing and getting a job and all. And especially this time is pretty tough. So people are going through a tough time. It's a rough patch for everybody. And so I want to make sure people get that.
No, I mean, I can tell you, it's the failure is a common thread in almost every successful person.
Yeah.
Right now, so you saw Snowflake,
right.
The largest IPO in the history of software.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can supersede them when UiPath goes IPO. But if you look at their CEO Slutman,
right.
who's
he's the third IPO, I believe.
It's his third IPO. Yep, he took ServiceNow public and another company before that. He has written a really good book called The Tape Sucks, and in that book he talks about his failures. I think I read somewhere he failed an interview 10 times to get into a specific company. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
10 times, and they still interviewed him 11 times.
Well, yeah. But I can tell you, I have similar experiences in some of the things.
Really?
Yep. It was pretty interesting.
You failed an interview, you're saying?
Yes, I failed a bunch of them. Yep.
Okay.
Early in my career, but yes.
Because
you can imagine, every one of them pretty much told me where I was wrong.
Right.
And so I went in with a different strategy.
And they were right. Do you agree with them that they were right when you failed the interview and they told you why?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Because I know you, PD, outside work and all, and find you to be pretty smart guy. We call you walking Wikipedia. So if you fail interview, that's a little surprising for me.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you are working with some very bright people, right? And they are, maybe PhD in maths and, on the cutting edge of technology. So one question I have, how you deal with people or how you manage people who know more than you. And sometimes these people come with the baggage too. Sometimes they'll have a big ego, and rightly so maybe, because they know so much. So my main question is how you manage people who know more than you. Maybe they're senior than you, but you are managing them because of the hierarchy and all, and often it happens. So anything, any advice for people to manage smart people?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. In my team, my direct reports, one of the bar that I have is I only hire people who are smarter than me, in one shape or form or the other. And hiring and managing smart people is a very interesting, it's a science and an art.
True.
In the sense that, most of the people that I have right now, they are from Ivy League schools. If you look at their credentials, you'd be like, okay, this guy is like, off the charts, smart. They know the business. They have been technologists in the past, or even AI practitioners in the past. So they have these, if you were to build a dream team, those would be the kind of people you would want to have in there. What do I provide them at the end of the day? Exactly as I said, all the learnings that I've had from my failures. So I want to make sure that, I'm just warning them and giving them these early warning signs. But at the time of hiring, one of the things I look at is, can they learn, right? There are a lot of smart people out there, but if they cannot learn, especially, when you're doing things like V1 product development, that is a golden trait, right? If you lost that learning capability sometime in your life at some point, you won't be able to grow anymore, right? You've seen people in Microsoft, if you remember, there were people who have been in Microsoft for 20-25 years. They're still at principal level. Don't get me wrong; they are really good at what they do.
True.
But they've stopped. Somehow they've stopped growing up the ranks. And I would attribute it primarily to this ability that comes in. You start being comfortable with what you have, and because you're really good at it, and so you're like you stop learning. So the people who are smarter that I've worked with, so either they are my peers or above me or below me. Below me, definitely I'm looking at people who can learn. Then the people who are my peers or above me, usually it's a matter of knowing what exactly is driving them and making sure that you're aligned with their growth goals. That has helped a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So I would like to know the worst advice you got about management.
I've been lucky in the sense that I did not have bad managers. One of my first managers in Microsoft was an ER doctor, and I thought I had good work ethic. This guy was way off the charts, and so I upped the game there. My second manager, he was the person who in Microsoft Research, he was the guy who was the founder of Encarta, the first electronic encyclopedia. I learned a lot of people dynamics from him because he was in Microsoft Research. We had some of the top and the smartest people in the world in the computer science industry working for us, with us. And it was interesting to learn how to navigate different things, how to bring teams together around products or the themes that we wanted them to focus on.
Okay.
So I was lucky there.
So
but
no bad advice you ever got?
Not really. Like there were early in my career, there were things that were told to me. Like for example, when I became a dev lead, one of the first things I think one of my manager was telling me was, make sure that you are gauging the performance of your devs on the lines of code that they are coding. I'm like, oh
Wow.
my God, that's a really bad one. That is a really bad one.
So that's a bad advice.
That is a bad
I've
advice.
been through that too. One of my managers did ask me the number of line of codes I'm writing. That's horrible.
Yep.
Why somebody care about that?
No, I've seen, like when I was coding, I used to take pride in my programs being really small, right? Because
True.
they were performant. Like when we were working as a dev, I'm talking about 2000 to 2005, right?
Right.
You needed to write performant code.
Right.
So if you wrote really long piece of code, it was definitely not good at all. So I used to take pride in that. So, and when I heard this advice
Right.
about the counting the number of line of code, I was like, nah,
That's
that
really
can't
a
be
bad
true.
advice.
Yes. I'm glad you agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. So the best advice you heard about management, which it stays with you and everywhere you remember every day, or
Yeah, there is a lot of stuff. There is a lot of stuff I can quote, but there is something which was I had a conversation with the Turing Award winner, Butler Lamson. Butler used to work in Microsoft Research, and I quote this, even to my team. Almost everyone who knows me knows about this incident. The first time I met him, as you can imagine, he's a luminary. Like, Turing Awards are like Nobel Prizes in computer science. And, so I walked up to him and I asked him a question on, give me some piece of advice. And, it's a very bad question to ask to a Turing Award winner. But we were talking about all the different things that MSR was working on at that time and how I was thinking of translating them into real products. And so there was one thing Butler said. He said, every problem in computer science can be solved by either introduction or deletion of one level of interaction. That has been an amazing advice. It has stayed with me throughout my career.
So explain me, I did not get it much. You're saying
any problem in computer science.
In computer science.
Yes.
It's not about the management.
In
computer science, you're saying in algorithm and all.
It even translates to management in many cases, right? So, for example, if you look at REST APIs, right?
Right.
They are a level of interaction.
Yes, I agree there. Yes. I was thinking, okay, you are going to translate that thing into the management.
Yep. Even in management, so if things are not working, you might want to introduce one level of interaction, right? Either you introduce a new process,
or
person. You introduce, a new manager. I've seen it work even in real life. So that was if like I was cornered and I was told, okay, tell us one thing. That is probably the only thing I can quote. But as I said, I've been fortunate enough to get like really good managers in my life. My current manager, he used to be the head of Dynamics.
Okay.
So
what do you appreciate about him?
About my current manager?
Yeah, you said, he's a good manager.
A lot of autonomy, right? He has given me a lot of autonomy. There's a lot of, confidence he has in me, because usually when you're working in these settings, if your manager is coming in and break checking you all the time, that is not a good place to be in. So especially when you're doing, completely greenfield V1 product development, everything is on the table, right? And so you need to have that autonomy where you need to go in and test certain things. Like, for example, I'll tell you, in my product lines, in one of the product line, we did the classic platform build. So write the specs, build something one by one. In the other product line, we implied that strategy, which I call, productization of a service. We went in and pretty much built a service for 4 customers. Then we looked at, what are the common objects or components in there, and we said, okay, this is what the product should look like. These common components are the product, and so that became the workbench. In another product line, as I was saying earlier, we didn't know how to build things because we weren't sure of, what would the customers want, how the things would work there. And we said, okay, let's go in and acquire 2 or 3 companies and try to chain them together. But again, as I said, if I didn't have the autonomy, I wouldn't be able to test all these different ways of building a product line.
Right. Okay, good. So this is my second last question. Would you like to suggest some, book which influenced you most? A book which all the young kids should read?
Those books keep changing.
True.
As a matter of fact, so my latest one that has been really useful is this Principles by Ray Dalio.
Yes.
This radical candor and radical transparency comes from that book.
Yes.
But I was talking to a mentee of mine a couple of days ago, and he reminded me I used to quote Art of War a lot. About 4 years ago.
Right.
So I was big into Art of War at that time, but now it's Principles, and it's, as you can imagine, it's everything in between.
Yes.
But I think you do take away a lot of those things. There are certain principles that you stick to that stick by you and make you what you are.
Right.
So yeah, if
actually, that book of Ray Dalio's Principles is the book I think I'm going to give to all my management staff in this Christmas. And I think for coming few years, I'm going to keep giving that book till something else replaces that.
Yep. But the book before this one, so I'll tell you my progression. So before Ray Dalio, it was Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Okay.
That is a book that Satya uses all this thing about growth mindset, what the characteristics of a growth mindset. Those all come from that book.
Okay.
So it's the title is Mindset. That was a really good one. So like for almost a couple of years, I was like completely in love with that, trying to make sure I'm applying those principles almost in daily life. Before that, I think it was Good to Great. So there's been like these really good books that have come in at the right moment in my life, where I was thankful that there is knowledge out there, and people have crystallized that knowledge into actionable things that you can do.
Right. Okay, good. Yeah. The last question: how scared are you of GPT-3?
I'm not as scared, but I'm really excited about the potential.
I'm scared. I feel like it's going to take away so many jobs.
I don't think so.
I just saw Microsoft just laid off so many of editors. And it's all news things written by computers now.
No, but you can imagine, the GPT-3 has learned stuff from the content that is out there, right? If you look at the way they train the model, it's usually on Reddit posts, Twitter data, and all that stuff.
Right.
So there will be jobs for people in this new world, right? It's like the industrial revolution, right? There used to be farmers, who used to use the implements. There used to be weavers. There used to be people, who do the carving and all that stuff. So when the automated loom came on, the weavers were out of their jobs. But you had now high-paying jobs like the machinists,
right?
Right, and so along every industrial revolution, you've seen things change,
right? And
high-value jobs being created,
right?
If you look at, it is interesting that we are at the cusp of this revolution, and it's a fascinating time to be alive. So although we are going to this, the fourth industrial revolution, that's going to be AI. But if you look at, even the population demographics, right? So you can argue that yes, there will be some high value jobs being created, but then we are losing so many people, right? Who or people who are losing their jobs. If you look over the long term, one of the things that Elon Musk and everyone talks about, even Jack Ma from Alibaba, is that the world population is going to decline, right? We've reached kind of the peak population in China, over here in Europe, in the US itself. So as the population starts declining, and you're seeing some parts of that happening already in Japan, right? There's a big aging population. They don't have a lot of young people there anymore. And they have embraced automation and AI like anything. Like UiPath has a big presence in Japan. Like I can even quote numbers, like it's a big chunk of our revenue comes from Japan. And I've seen the market. I've gone there multiple times, and it's a fascinating market to be in. I think the world is going to go towards how Japan is operating. And so you would see more of these high value jobs being created. So I don't think there's anything to be scared about. GPT-3, if only thing is, for example, you're seeing all these no code, low code platforms come out.
Right.
Well, I've played with GPT-3. It can actually generate code pretty efficiently.
Right. Yep.
And you might have seen those videos where you can just specify in natural language and it automatically starts creating UX. Right.
You just say, ask the system in English, and it will write SQL query for you.
SQL,
joining
HTML,
multiple tables and all.
Yep.
So I am scared. I don't know. I don't completely agree with all the industrial waves came in and changes happened. Horses were replaced by cars, and then the looms were replaced by the factories and all those things. But this time, I feel it is this wave, this tsunami is so big, the technology tsunami, which is wiping out so many jobs. Like today, just before we met, I went to Fry's, and the whole store is empty. And I asked them, "Are you guys closing?" So I'm seeing like Amazon is eating everybody's lunch, and because of the technology. And so my concern is we are taking the jobs from everywhere and just giving the
Concentrating
job to few people in here in Seattle. And it's happening everywhere. The trucks are driving by itself. The car is almost driving by itself. So I don't know. I feel I am part of the system, but I feel pretty apprehensive about the future because of the technology.
I am more hopeful on the things because as a species we have some almost formidable challenges in front of us, right? If you look at things like food security, if you look at climate change, you need some really compelling technology to be able to counter this stuff. Like I was looking at this new project, a company somewhere in India which is using drones to drop trees and plant trees, right? If you have to plant 1 million trees, can you imagine how many humans it would take and how much time it would take to do that? But using these drones, you can easily do that.
See, this scares me more. Because if you think India, right, the huge part of India is a farming, and farmers are there, and that's what they do by hand and all those things. And of course, I don't think we can shy away from technology.
No, but Rafat, imagine if you gave a farmer a drone,
right,
and told him to plant this thing,
right.
Let's say you do targeted irrigation of the plants, you would save water, you would save resources,
right?
Or give them vertical farming infrastructure to be able to grow
do
food.
all that. And as you know, in India, I don't know the population of Bihar. It's one of the state in India. I believe, maybe I'm guessing, it may be size of Mexico. Those many people go around the other state just to do farming, and if you give drones, like hundreds and thousands of farmers will not have any job. And
I think the farming will expand. I think the farming will expand. So for example, if you have a small farm right now, and if you start creating a vertical farm in there, they don't have the labor. They don't have enough labor to do that. So they would need some automated tools to be able to do this, right? Imagine if that farmer can just sit down and look at a bunch of screens where he can water the things autonomously, plant them, weed them. It's going to be an interesting world.
True. So I think this discussion will never going to finish.
No.
We're going to have keep talking. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you coming over and recording this.
You're right.
And I hope our audience who are far away countries and young kids who are getting into the workforce learn something from your experience. So thank you very much for sharing.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.